I'm Carl Nelson of the Wellesley Celebrations Committee, and I'm here with Pete Jones. We are at one of the window displays that is celebrating veterans, the month of November, veterans throughout Wellesley. And we ask you to come down and see them. November 5th to the 28th, and throughout the town of Wellesley and here at Haskins Automotive.
Here we are at 467 Washington Street, the Wellesley Celebrations Committee, saluting our veterans in 2020. In back of me here is a 1943 Willys Jeep. The Willys Jeep ended up being one of the most versatile pieces of equipment in the arsenal of our war machinery in the United States. This Willys Jeep here was donated by the Fort Devens Museum. It's a military museum up in Fort Devens, and it's a 1943 vintage. It was in the war. It used to be the backbone of the Army in the Pacific, especially. They have put it through every torture test known to mankind. They produced over 630,000 of these units. And different organizations. This is a Willys Jeep, but Ford Motor Company also turned out Willys Jeeps to the specification, all of which had to be tested, and we'll talk about that a little in the front of the building here. The Willys Jeep, this 1943 version of it, as you can see in the picture below here, was put through torturous tests by the Army and Navy also. They also made amphibian versions of this Willys Jeep. Here you can see they've actually mounted artillery pieces on it. Here's the Jeep again in action here. They actually dropped the Jeep off of tall inclines, etc., to test it. This is showing one of the altitude shots where they drove it off of a ramp to give it a final test. These had to go through rigorous testing, and this Willys Jeep was the only vehicle that could take as much abuse as they'd put it through. Down below here is First Lieutenant Donald Leyland. He was in the Army officers' quarters at Okinawa. You can see the pup tent that's in the background here, as well as the pup tents that were used in Okinawa, are almost identical. And believe it or not, with all those men without their shirts on there in Okinawa, this was the officers' quarters, believe it or not. A bunch of pup tents, that's all they had to work out of. Up here shows an Army general looking at the Willys Jeep after they mounted machine guns. They had to put machine guns on them, artillery pieces on them. They had to put them through horrendous testing. Over here is the Fort Devens Museum, a little brochure on that. And they have much more of this on this vehicle and what was done during the Second World War up at that museum. Over here is a Time Weekly magazine, special commemorative edition, talking about the Second World War. After the war, what was interesting is all the Willys Jeeps that were left. If you look down here, you can see Born for War and Ready for Peace. It shows a farmer with a wagon full of cows in the back, and the Willys Jeep is pulling them across his property. So those Willys Jeeps that were left over from the war, they put them to practical use during peacetime also. What's also interesting is that every piece of property, as you can see, the tents and all the mess gear and everything that they were issued in the service, had to have a property tag on it, slip, so that before you got out, you were responsible for returning all those different items on there, such as your mess kits, your jackets, your shoes, your trousers. Everything had to be returned back to the service for future usage. And this is an actual slip during that. But this is the what a normal encampment would look like. Picture down here of it, and a one that the Celebrations Committee put together with the Fort Devens Museum folks, so that you could enjoy what was going on in 1943. This was the DeCecco family in Wellesley. Her father was one of a 10-man crew on a B-24 Liberator, which is here, which they built between 1939 and 1945. It's a 4-engine aircraft, and it carries a huge amount of armament and bomb load here that we describe here. Her father, which is this gentleman right here, was a mechanic on that B-24. He had over 200 missions, and on many of those missions he wrote in his logbook describing what was happening on those missions. On one particular mission, this is the engines that power the B-24 bomber. The flak hit the aircraft and took out 3 of the 4 engines, which left them in a bad spot over enemy territory, and the captain ordered them all to bail out of the aircraft in enemy territory. Mr. DeCecco here, PFC DeCecco, said to the captain, I can get these engines running again. And because the oil lines were broken, so he got the engine running again, 3 of the 4 engines, and then they returned in one piece back to friendly territory. Pretty interesting story. This was his squadron, the 454 bomb group. This gentleman here is another person that was lived in town, and he was a lieutenant, Bob Hinchcliffe, in the 78th Division of the infantrymen in Germany during V-Day. And there's a picture of him with his buddies that he was very close to. This is my old squadron here, BMFAT 201 Marine Corps Squadron. It was Fighter Training Squadron out of Cherry Point. And that's an F-4J Phantom from VMFAT 201 that they used in the Vietnam conflict. Over in this neck of the woods here, we're showing some of the tools that they used when they were in the trenches. They had a trench tool here that has a pick on one end and a shovel on the other. And there's an actual canteen from World War II and a cartridge belt from the M1s that they used to use back in the Second World War, and a typical private's uniform that they had. Yes, so this is Carl Rao's relatives. Carl I grew up with in town here, and Joan Rao was a war firefighter. She was putting out many of the fires during the bombing raids that her husband was involved in. Merlin Roger Minor was in the Army. They had a lot of support from the women as nurses and as supplementing the men, putting aircraft and different barges and things of that nature together. This is actually the D-Day in actual photographs taken at D-Day here. Over 4,000 Allied soldiers, 20,000 French civilians killed in bombing, as well as 4,000 plus German troops. D-Day changed the course of the war back then. This was the actual plan of attack. This was top secret at the time. Now it's open. And the orders of the day from Dwight D. Eisenhower here. You can see the Higgins craft, which we have a bigger model of on the side there. And that Higgins craft is also shown at the Collins Foundation, which is a military educational foundation in Hudson. Unfortunately, during the war, we had a great many soldiers that never got to fight in the war, because when they came in the Higgins craft, it would hang up in deep water and they'd jump out, and they had 60-pound packs on their back, and they'd all drowned. So many of them drowned before they even got into the action. These flags that you'll see are flags that are given to the families in respect for the loved ones that they lost. Torrey DeFazio did a great job on the World War I memorial. This is a list of residents in Wellesley that we're honoring during the D-Day, and these are participants that we know of that were there at the time, and there are many more that we don't even know of that still served in town. Over here, we're just showing some of the boots of the day. These are the boots that they used to wear. A lot of people had very cold feet when they got to the Battle of the Bulge because these weren't highly insulated, but it was the boot of the day. This is one of the other veterans that was in town that lives in my neighborhood, actually. James Tatari. He and his brother both served in the armed forces during that period of time. He was in the U.S. Air Force. This is his actual, he was a captain, and this is his actual uniform that he had. Down here is an actual newspaper article the day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, showing the destruction of Pearl Harbor, talking about those that were known dead or injured and those that are in the hospital here. This was the sneak attack by the Japanese at the time, December 7th, 1941. This particular photograph here that I'm showing in World War I is very interesting. It is a photograph that's rather famous that was painted showing an American coming over French infantrymen and basically telling them, hold on, because the Americans are coming. Here is an amazing display over here. This is a gentleman that was in the front line in Belgium on the German border. He was a BAR, Browning automatic rifle marksman, and he was in the battle in the forest, and the fighting got heavy, bullets all over the place, and what happened was his rifle had jammed on him. As he went down to clear the action out of his rifle, the sniper bullet came through, went through his helmet, down his back, and through his behind, which he survived that injury, only to be brought, after being patched up, to the Battle of the Bulge, which he ended up having damage to his feet because of the freezing temperatures, and back then their boots didn't have any type of insulation in them. His Bronze Star here and his Purple Heart for being injured are displayed here. Very interesting story. This is the Albert Barberi. He was a PFC, and he was a member of the Veterans of the Battle of the Bulge here, and that's an actual uniform. Joe Oliveri, he was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps. He still lives in town here, and he's in charge of our graves and ceremonial things that go on here in town. Works with us all the time at the American Legion. He's a member of our Post 72, and works with all the veterans in town, and helps replace 800 flags every year on all the grave sites here in town for veterans. This is his dress blues, Marine Corps dress blues. He was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps. He had 2 deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq during 2002 and 2006. This is one of the old cartridge belts that they used to use to put their cartridges in that they needed for their firearms, for their rifles. Yes, this photograph here is an American Legion member, Nathaniel Kettendorf. He was the adjutant and past commander of the post, American Legion Post 72 here in Wellesley. He's reading Remember Me, basically Please Remember Me, a Veterans Day observation back in 1999. It's a touching poem. This photograph here is another photograph of Lieutenant Bob Hitchcliffe. He was involved during the war, working in an aid camp. After returning home, Bob went to school and continued his career. As many of the service personnel did, they left whatever they were doing, whether they were in a farm doing hay recovery or whether they were a CPA in a business. They all left to basically serve their country, and Bob was a survivor. This gentleman here, Robert Fleming, another family that's been here for years and years, generations here in town. He was a first lieutenant in Vietnam. This is him actually on deployment in the battle zone. This picture here shows 2 bombs that were dropped by an F-4J aircraft that you see pulling away here on that particular facility. there. Bob was very interesting to talk to. He's part of a 5-man team that used to go behind the Vietnamese lines during the evening to check on the war activity there. He was actually on a helicopter team. And he is a Bronze Star recipient, and he had the Combat Infantry Medal and Air Medal for over 125 helicopter missions. That's a lot of missions to survive. Here's a famous poem that we do all the time, Flanders Field. And this is a poem that we read at all of our Veterans Day ceremonies that we have. It's called In Flanders Field. This gentleman here was a recipient of a Silver Star. There's a whole history here in a newspaper discussing Stephen Sullivan, who was killed in Iraq. Stephen Sullivan was well known for providing bodyguard assistance for Condoleezza Rice and other dignitaries. Down here, he actually provided support for Oliver North here, and this is Stephen Sullivan down here. Paul and Phyllis Spinelli sent us a current picture of her son currently serving in the Marine Corps. This is the actual summer uniform of a pilot, Joseph Tatari, related to James Tatari in town here, his brother. He was killed in action. He was a Navy pilot. This is the actual uniform for another resident of town here, Mr. Messing. He was in the United States Air Force. On this window here, and this is an actual card, a gasoline rationing card that was provided to one of the residents in town here. Over here is Donald T. Leyland. He had a very interesting career. He went from being an enlisted man to getting a field commission as a second lieutenant, ended up going to OCS all during the wartime activities, and was a first lieutenant. He was part of the Mule Team forces during the war, because not only did they have equipment, etc., but some of the places that they went to, they actually had to use mules and horses. One of the interesting things, he said he was on an island, and the Japanese Zeros were really putting the hurts on the troops. And that night, during the night, Pappy Boyington, famous Pappy Boyington, you probably heard of him, a Corsair in charge of the Black Sheep Corsairs, drove in that night. And the next day, he said when the Japanese came to strafe them, and he said the Corsairs, Pappy Boyington's Black Sheep, were waiting for them. And as they were waiting for them, the amazing thing is they all got out of their trenches, which is their safety zone, and they were standing out here like this, looking at the sky, watching this thing happening, and then finally realized they should be back in the trenches during this escapade that was going on out there. And Pappy Boyington saved that island back in the Pacific. Over here, saluting our veterans for 2020, the Wellesley bookstore carries a number of military books that they sell over there. They donated these to the event here so people could get a better idea of what our soldiers went through, and they're located at 82 Central Street here in Wellesley. This is a salute. My wife actually drew this out, a salute to all the veterans here. One of the interesting things that the Wellesley Townsmen used to publish was all the different families that had a number of brothers that went in simultaneously into the service. This happens to be the Donahue family, where they had the 4 brothers that went in. This is a interesting photo down here that people should take a look at. This was taken in Belgium when the paratroopers came into Belgium. Very interesting. This was a very interesting story. The town of Wellesley produced gold signet rings for all the 326 soldiers that went into the war. And we searched for over a year to find these signet rings. We finally found 2 of them. One was in Michigan, sent to us via Facebook, a picture of it. Very interesting. Here is a picture of the actual ring here. Again, of the 326, we found 2 after searching for a year. They were solid 24 karat gold, and this gentleman told us that this was one of the best things that his grandfather, and most cherished things. And the little note here says, "To the kind people of Wellesley, through the townsmen, I wish to extend my appreciation for their beautiful present that they sent me. I was in the front line trenches when it came in, and believe me, for a few minutes I forgot war." Down here we have a picture of the Home Guard. During the war we had different home guards around the states that actually looked after, say, Wellesley and the area, to make sure that there were no enemies present, because they didn't know, because the enemies used to sneak in on boats and assimilate with the population back then to get information, as much information as they could. And down here, the first row here, we have all the gentlemen that were veterans at that time. They're veterans in Wellesley, and this goes back to 1973. They were still alive after the war. Here, this is December. This news bulletin here was from December 7th, 1941, talking about over 400 in Oahu. Latest report: Tokyo announces the state of war on the U.S. And so this is an actual photograph of that. Speaking of the Pearl Harbor and the bombing of Pearl Harbor that this news bulletin talked about, these are the survivors that were left after Pearl Harbor. There were 15,000 total remaining in 61. There are about 16 in this photograph, and they met every year to get together to reunite themselves with their comrades. The photo here was taken in 1982. Today, I believe there is about 16 left of the original 15,000. Over here, in this window, very interesting. So this is an actual mess kit used in World War I. And a cup and fork and knife. These were donated temporarily from the Collins Foundation for this event. Over here is a mess kit. This is what they used to actually have their K and C rations doled out in. And this plaque here is showing the rank of the different medals that were awarded to those who passed away or who survived the service. Up here are the medals of honor in the different branches of the service. Over here is a display of World War I helmet and a gas mask. During the World War I, the Germans came out with gas, mustard gas, and it was a horrible death to a lot of our soldiers, etc. As a matter of fact, Jack Early, who was the first commander of Post 72 in 1919 in Wellesley's Post 72, came home. He went to a meeting. He was 26 years old at the time. He went to a Legion meeting. They had a flat tire on the side of the road. What happened was that his buddy got out of the car to change the flat tire. When he got back in the car, Jack Early was dead, and they attributed to the gas during the trenches that he served in during the First World War. Again, this is the type of mask and the helmet that they used during World War I. Over here is a photograph from American Legion Post 72 here in town, and it talks about Jack Early, the first post commander in 1919, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which we told you before, from the Army. These the soldiers in the front here are the original, and this is the original Legion building that is no longer there and has been replaced with the Council on Aging building. That whole piece of property and the facilities that used to be on it were donated by American Legion Post 72 to the town of Wellesley. Up here, the completion of Memorial Grove that we completed on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, with a QR code here that you can scan with your phone. and it will come up with a video that will tell you everything that was going on in Wellesley during the 1919 celebration. Here we are at 77 Central Street, the William Ravis property. What we're showing here is the support that the women of the United States gave and local women here in town, etc. These women gave support throughout the war. They not only built aircraft, which we're showing up here, showing some of the fighter aircraft that they built, but they also became very good pilots, and they piloted these aircraft to the landing zones where our troops would then take them and enter the war with them. Back in those days, women did not fight in the war, but they provided a huge amount of support. We're showing them in different things. She's a mechanic here working on one of the Wasp engines that were used in some of the fighters aircraft. We show them here learning how to shoot artillery pieces. Over here we're showing how the waves were using the different sighting mechanisms to find locations where they were on ships and things of that nature, and actually helping build this equipment. This picture here shows a whole squadron of waves there. As of June 1942, the females members during World War II were some 100,000 waves, served in a variety of capacities during the war as instructors for male pilots, because they built these aircraft and they flew these aircraft, and so who better than have the waves instruct the men that would go off to war. Over here you can see some more training that was happening. This was actually showing them a high altitude oxygen and how to use the masks to make sure that they didn't pass out. This picture down here is showing another resident in Wellesley, Donald T. Leyland. He was a commander, he was in the Army. He was a commander of I Group, and he was a first lieutenant. He served in the 188th Parachute Infantry, Asiatic Pacific Theater, also Luzon and Guadalcanal and the Philippines. So these soldiers traveled all over during the fighting. So they didn't just fight in one continent, etc. They would travel for different continents, different islands, etc. Frederick Gorgon here, Jr., he was a local resident here in town, and he was an Air Force lieutenant colonel. Up here we're showing Albert Coffey, Jr., another resident. He was in the 10th Mountain Division in northern Italy, and he was in combat there. He was an Army PFC. Yeah, down here is a photograph of Francis Nadru. He was in the Asiatic Pacific Theater in Luzon, and he was an Army PFC. Up here is Thomas Keefe, Jr. He was actually an Army Staff Sergeant. He was in the 27th Infantry Division. He was a Bronze Star recipient for the action in the island of Saipan. And here is an interesting picture of him here at a Japanese train station after the war. To keep the soldiers safe, they had to have patrols there, and he was on one of those patrols for about 6 months over in Japan to make sure that the war didn't kick up again over there. Val Ringer, he was a Navy Lieutenant Commander. He received a Navy Purple Heart, another veteran here from town of Wellesley. William Pounder was an Army Captain. Again, another resident here in the town of Wellesley. These are actual photographs during the Second World War of what was going on in the town of Wellesley. Here the men were in the Wellesley Town Hall registering for selective service. And you can see in those days they all dressed up in suits and hats and came with their very best to sign up for the draft, basically to serve their country. Again, a reminder of Memorial Grove, open to the public here in Wellesley by Skating Pond by the Wellesley High School. A QR code you can scan and it will tell you the whole history of what was going by Torrey DeFazio. Again, a commander in the United States Navy and a member of our American Legion Post 72 and of the Wellesley Celebrations Committee. Up here were safety volunteers inside the Sprague School. They were practicing a mock bombing, and as you can see, the old candlestick telephones that they used to communicate back and forth with different high-ranking officials. Here we see, back 'em up, we were showing our 4-star general, Dwight D. Eisenhower, say, buy extra bonds. So they used to invest in the armed forces so we can continue to fight the war. Another thing that's very interesting here in Wellesley is Wellesley College also has sold a piece of property called the North 40 to us. In the North 40, we actually had victory gardens that the girls would do. In those victory gardens, they grow all sorts of fresh vegetables, etc., for the war effort. Here is a picture here showing, again, one of the many victory gardens throughout the United States. This photograph here is one of our more famous people here in Wellesley, from the town of Wellesley, Constantino DiCecco. He served on the 734th Bombardment Squadron. He was on a 10-man crew. He did over 225 flights into enemy territories. Very significant amount of flying. Here you can see Mr. DiCecco in the middle here, as he's looking over the flight route for the next flight that they were having. These pilots and these crews had an amazing things that they had to go through. Flak when the artillery from the enemy exploded and threw shrapnel through the whole aircraft, knocking out anything and everybody in its way. Here we're showing a B-24 that they served on. Mr. DiCecco is here on the far right here as part of the 10-man crew here. One of the most interesting things here is the flight logbook provided here by his daughter, showing all the different flights that he was on, talking about how many 10 500-pound bombs over in Hungary that he had, 20 100-pound bombs over a warehouse in northern Italy. All of these different things that happened. One of the most amazing things that this flight documentation shows is the fact that how the initiative these crews took to stay alive and keep each other alive in the air. They got hit by heavy flak, and the flak was due to the artillery fire, and they knocked out 3 of the 4 engines. The pilot was going to have everybody bail out over enemy territory, which is not a great place to bail out. DiCecco rather was able to get 3 of the 4 engines back running, and they were able then to go into a safe haven rather than bailing out and getting captured by the Germans. This is a very interesting picture. This is Rosie the Riveter. As you notice, Rosie the Riveter here is showing her muscles, etc. The lady that was used for this photograph had no idea how she was going to look in the end here, and it's rather humorous. She said, "I had no idea that they were going to put muscles in my arms for this picture," but the troops loved it, and the morale was up because of it. Rosie the Riveter, showing the women participating in the war, making aircraft, tanks, anything that was used during the war, those women would get involved in.